PimentaThe ashes of Polar Explorer Henry Worsley were buried near Sir Ernest Sletons' grave here. His widow Joanna reveals why it was the perfect place to say goodbye. The cemetery at Grytviken is a desolate place, far from civilization and battered remorselessly by the elements. Here in the South Atlantic, among the graves of whalers, Sir Ernest Sleton was laid to rest in 1922 on the instructions of his widow Emily. She said it was what the legendary explorer, who dedicated his life to journeying to the most remote regions on Earth, would have wanted. Now there is a new headstone at Grytviken. A few days ago the ashes of Henry Worsley, another great adventurer, were buried on a hill overlooking the cemetery. His widow Joanna was present at the poignant ceremony along with their children Max and Alicia. Worsley, 55, was following in the footsteps of his hero Sleton when he died almost 2 years ago attempting a solo trek across the Antarctic peninsula. We all feel there can be no more perfect resting place for Henry. Joanna. He was only 30 miles from the finishing post when he was airlifted off the ice after 69 days and later died from multiple organ failure, having walked himself to exhaustion. We all feel there can be no more perfect resting place for Henry, says Joanna, who was given special permission by the authorities in South Georgia to bury her husband's remains near his fellow explorer. The sadness was overwhelming, but it was a beautiful finale. As the snow fell, part of me smiled inside thinking how much Henry would have loved being there in those conditions. Closure is a very strange word when someone dies, but during the service I felt so peaceful. It is an extraordinary setting. The ceremony included a service at the Small Whalers Church at Grytviken, and afterwards the tradition of pouring a tot of whiskey on the headstones of explorers was honored. Pinned to Joanna's jacket was the Polar Medal for Outstanding Exploration of the Regions, which was awarded posthumously to Worsley. The former Army officer, who from childhood was fascinated by the extreme South, knew the cemetery well, and Joanna, 58, adds, "I could visualize so clearly Henry's face when he saw Grytviken for the very first time from a ship, his sparkling eyes, his huge smile and the excitement written all over his face." PimentaThe. Far from home, Joanna Worsley at her husband's grave on South Georgia. Once during a military tour, Worsley spent a night huddled in a sleeping bag next to Sleton's grave. It is a 2-day journey by ship to Grytviken from Port Stanley, in the Falklands, and the burial was a year in the planning. To reach the cemetery she traveled with Ice Tracks Expeditions, which specializes in polar travel. For Joanna, who did not share her husband's love of polar adventure, the period since his death on January 24 last year has often been tumultuous. Worsley was pulling all his provisions on a sled in temperatures of -40°C and with only a flimsy tent for shelter. In audio diaries he had spoken of rapid weight loss and often painstakingly slow progress in ferocious storms. When he was rescued after walking 913 miles, including reaching the South Pole, Worsley was worn out. In his final message he said, "It is with sadness that I report at his journey's end, so close to my goal." Monday, February 1, 2016. First person together with Charles Burton to visit both the North and South Poles by surface means. However, the severity of his condition was not immediately known and he had no inkling he was dying. Following the tragedy there was an immediate clamor of attention at a time when his widow was trying to mourn and deal with the unexpected manner of his loss. "It has been really tough," says Joanna, who lives in London and Daily Express. Saturday, December 16, 2017. 25 works for a construction company. "I spent about 9 months in a thick, black fog. I escaped for a while and went to a refugee camp in Greece, but I was terribly broken. Then we went to Punta Arenas in Chile where Henry died and later flew to the Antarctic to the camp where he started out. That was a very painful journey, but it was just about getting answers. I spoke to everyone, the guides and doctors. They were all distraught." She now believes that her husband continued trekking despite his failing health because he was so close to success. He was trying to collect money for the Endeavour Fund, which helps injured servicemen and women and has Prince William as its patron. It later emerged that he had raised £560,000, more than 5 times his original target. Henry had such a strong belief that the body's weakness is all in the mind, but he was wrong about that, says Joanna. He was determined to tough it out. "In those last few days while he was still walking but exhausted, I was pleading with him to call for help, but he didn't want to let anyone down, and mixed in with her grief was a sense of rage that she was left without a husband and the children fatherless." Max, 23, works for a boat construction company, while 21-year-old Alicia is a costume design assistant. "It's not so much anger with Henry, but because we had so many unfulfilled dreams," adds Joanna, who'd been married for 22 years. "I was such a patient, supportive Army wife. We talked about doing so much after he retired from the services, but he just wanted to get this one last big expedition out of his system. Also, there was ambivalence towards the frozen wildernesses which captivated Worsley, and so often took him away from his family for months on end and ultimately claimed his life. It's not my world, and Henry knew that, says his widow. I remember when he came back from one expedition, he took me in his arms and laughed as he told me how much I would have hated the journey. I will never go back again. In some ways, the Antarctic was the other woman in our marriage, and she won. She got Henry in the end. PimentaThe determined Henry's headstone is carried to his final resting place gradually. However, there was a dawning that she and the children must make this final journey for Henry. For all its bleakness and far south location, South Georgia is not quite the Antarctic, so perhaps the burial place represents a good compromise. Joanna says the idea came originally from one of Henry's close friends, and when I mentioned it to the children, we all just smiled at one another. It seemed so fitting because Sleton was so tremendously important to Henry. His feelings for Sleton verged on obsession, and they both loved that part of the world. A century ago, Worsley's hero failed to even start his attempt to cross the Antarctic landmass when his ship, the Endurance, was crushed by pack ice. He and his crew survived by sailing 700 nautical miles in lifeboats. Sleton, 47, died of a heart attack aboard ship on another Antarctic expedition, having ignored doctor's orders to slow down. The headstones of both men, who shared so much in common and are now united in death, are carved from granite. Henry Worsley's bears his name, date of his birth and death, along with a simple inscription, Soldier and Explorer. Onwards. To donate to the Endeavor Fund and Henry Worsley's memory, please go to virginmoneygiving.com. Someone special, Henry Worsley.